Dynamic controls allow us to automatically and effectively manage changes in volume so that our overall sound comes across as more coherent. Basically, dynamics can be controlled with gates, compressors, and limiters. For instance, we can control the sound of our kick and snare drums with them. In fact, we'll use them to control much of the band's overall sound. But first, we need to know what they are. This is a DBX 166XL. Many companies make this type of equipment, but this is a great piece of affordable gear that actually contains all three of those devices I just mentioned. Let's talk about compressors first. I'm sure you've heard of compressors. They're probably some of the most overused and misunderstood pieces of gear in use today. Used with discretion, they can improve your sound immensely. Used even a little bit wrong, they can screw everything up, but good. What is a compressor? Well, it's like having Superman operating a volume control. In its simplest terms, it's an extremely fast, intelligent means of turning volume up and down at precisely the right times so that low volumes aren't too low and high volumes aren't too high. It's important to know what each control on a compressor does. There are 5 major controls, so let's take a look at them now. The first control is the threshold. The threshold sets the input level, measured in decibels, where the compressor will begin its work. If the input level to the compressor is below the threshold setting, the compressor will do nothing. Once that input level is exceeded, the compressor will do what the other 4 controls tell it to do. The ratio controls the amount of compression once the input level has exceeded the threshold. It controls how much the input level will be reduced as a ratio of the input signal. The attack controls the amount of time before the compression starts after the threshold has been exceeded. The release controls how quickly the compression stops after the signal falls back below the threshold. And the output, or sometimes referred to as the makeup gain, controls the level of the compressor's output. Let's look at some examples of how the ratio affects the compression with the threshold set at 0 dB. In the case of a 1-to-1 ratio, for every 1 dB of input volume above the threshold, the compressor will allow a 1 dB rise in volume. So as our diagram shows, if the input level is plus 20 dB above the threshold, the compressor will allow the volume to go up to plus 20 dB. In other words, no compression at all will occur. Put in 20 dB, get 20 dB out. In the case of a 2-to-1 ratio, the compressor will allow a 1 dB increase for every 2 dBs of input over the threshold. So again, if we have a plus 20 dB input above the threshold, the compressor will only allow the volume to go up to plus 10 dB above the threshold. The point at which the threshold engages the compressor on the graph is called a hard knee. It almost looks like a bent leg. In this example, we have a ratio of 4-to-1. This time the compressor will only allow an increase of 1 dB for every 4 dBs above the threshold. So if we have an input of plus 20 dB above the threshold, the compressor will only allow an increase of plus 5 dB above the threshold. Is this starting to make sense? In our last example, we have a ratio of 20-to-1. This time the compressor will only allow an increase of 1 dB for every 20 dB above the threshold. So if we have an input of plus 20 dB above the threshold, the compressor will only allow an increase of plus 1 dB above the threshold. This is all well and good. As much as these examples illustrate how the ratio works, you would probably rarely set your threshold at 0 dB. Remember when we talked about the gain control on the mixer, we said we wanted to keep things below 0 dB? An example illustrating the opposite extreme would be like this. If you set your threshold at minus 15 dB, for instance, you give yourself the ability to control volume surges of plus 15 dB above the threshold before anything goes beyond the 0 dB mark. In these examples, the 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 4-to-1, and 20-to-1 ratios keep everything at or below 0 dB if we surge over the threshold by plus 15 dB. In reality, you're probably going to set your threshold somewhere between 0 dB and minus 6 dB for most applications, and then adjust the other controls accordingly. Using a compressor is kind of an art. It's the artful combination of the threshold, the ratio, the attack, and the release that will render the results you're looking for. Why are the attack and release settings important? Well, let's think about what might happen on a snare drum hit. It happens fast and may be very loud, sending the overall volume up rapidly too high a level if not compressed. A fast attack time can help the compressor kick in quickly to control that fast snare hit. The release time will determine when the compressor stops compressing. The compressor is an extremely versatile and valuable piece of equipment. In addition to using them with an insert to control, say, a snare drum mic, they're invaluable if placed between the mixer and the power amps to level off and control the dynamics of the overall band sound. They also protect the speakers from spikes in volume if used in this way. As of this filming, dbxpro.com has a document on their website called Compression 101 that is an excellent introduction to the use of compressors and stresses how their products can be applied. I suggest you read it. Now, DBX has a feature on their compressors called Over Easy. They know we all need help, so the Over Easy setting makes the compressor a little more forgiving. As you can see, with the Over Easy feature, the point at which the input meets the threshold is no longer a hard knee. It's more of a gradual curve. Limiters, on the other hand, do exactly what they say they do. They impose an absolute limit on how high the input signal is allowed to go. If you set a limiter at, say, minus 1 dB, the signal level will never exceed it, ever, no matter what. They're used extensively between the mixer and the power amps to ensure that the signal going to the speakers never exceeds where you set it, thus making sure that a quick increase in volume doesn't blow up your speakers. Gates provide another valuable level of control for your sound. Just as a compressor limits how high a signal level can pass through above the threshold, a gate is a device that will not allow any signal to pass through the system which is below the threshold. This has many applications if used judiciously. A noise gate can make sure that cymbal crashes are allowed to fade out to a predetermined volume before being cut off completely, thus preventing the cymbals trail off from lingering too long. Or it can make sure that no accidental guitar noises are heard if the guitarist brushes his strings when he's not playing. You have to be careful when setting up your gates. If you have the threshold set too high and you suddenly play very quietly, the entire sound will be gated and will vanish completely. So if you're not sure, err on the side of a more liberal threshold and allow a little more sound through. Engineers master using this equipment over a period of years. Like I said, it's an art and it's worthy of the effort you apply to it. But don't think you're going to learn it in a few minutes. You really need to experiment, and if you do, I guarantee you'll get good results.